The metal gates opened with a loud creak. Chains dragged across the stone floor. As the guards pulled the human forward, his shirt was torn. Blood dried on his chest and arms, and his leg barely moved. Right one eye was swollen shut. The other stared. Straight ahead, the crowd of aliens began to cheer, laugh, and roar to them. This was not a warrior. He was nothing but entertainment, a broken thing to die for their pleasure up in the grandstands. Noble aliens in long robes waved their claws and placed their bets. Some bet weapons, some bet ships, and one tall warlord, with gold armor across his shoulders, smiled as he raised his hand. He pointed at the chained alien girl beside him. "If the human survives more than 2 minutes, the slave girl is yours," he said to another noble. The others laughed. They laughed because the girl had been trained since birth to serve. Her skin shimmered like light on water. Her eyes were soft and sad. Always looking down, no one knew her real name. They only called her a prize. She did not look up when they spoke about her, not until she heard the human's chain stop. He had reached the center of the arena then. Something changed in her face. Her head turned, her eyes lifted, and for the first time in years, she stared at a man who was not afraid. He looked at the crowd without fear. He looked at the guards without hate. He looked at her, and something inside her chest moved. The announcer's voice echoed over the Colosseum. "Behold, the last of his kind, the wounded human from Earth, the one who dares stand where legends fall." The crowd cheered again. Alien warriors, giant and armed, stepped forward from the other side of the arena. They laughed as they saw who they were facing. The human had no weapon, no armor, just torn clothes, dry blood, and one good arm. The girl kept watching. No one else noticed how still she had become. The announcer raised his hand and shouted, "Let the match begin." The alien beasts charged. Crowd rose to their feet, but the human did not run. He stepped forward slowly. His bare foot hit the dust. His hands rose, not to shield, but to fight. The first alien reached him with a growl, swinging a hammer of bone and steel. Everyone expected the human to fly across the sand, broken and finished, but he moved low and fast, like a shadow under the hammer's arc. The alien's weapon hit air, then his throat caught a blow from the human's elbow. The alien stumbled, and the human did not stop. He took the weapon from the stunned hand, spun it once, and brought it down on the alien's back. The arena went silent. Only one sound remained, the girl's sharp breath. The second alien rushed forward, angry now, blades on both arms, eyes glowing red, but the human had already picked his next move. He dodged left, then dropped to the ground, sweeping the alien's leg. The alien fell hard. The human stood above him, the weapon now crackling with energy, and with one strike, the fight was over. The crowd did not cheer this time. They stared. The nobles leaned forward. The warlord who had offered the girl did not speak. He looked down at the human with new eyes. The girl, still on her knees, still in her silver chains, felt something in her throat. She touched her lips without thinking. She did not know this feeling. Her heart was beating faster. The human turned slowly, his face still calm. He looked straight at the nobles, then his eyes found her again, and without shouting, without raising his arms, without any sign of pride, he pointed at her just once. That was all. Then he dropped the hammer and waited. The guards did not move. The announcer was frozen. Even the arena beasts in cages stopped growling. Human had made his choice, and now the Empire had to decide if they would honor the bet or try to fight the one man who had just changed everything. The sand beneath the human's feet was still soaked with blood. The two dead warriors lay behind him, their armor cracked, their bodies still. No one moved. The betting nobles stared in silence. They had laughed only minutes ago. Now they leaned forward, whispering to one another. They were trying to understand what just happened, and whether they had just made a terrible mistake. Up in the corner, behind the golden warlord's chair, the alien girl still knelt. Her hands were cold, resting on her knees. But her heart would not slow. She kept staring at the human below. He had not raised his arms in victory. He had not smiled or looked proud. He stood still, waiting, as if the fight had not ended, as if it had just begun. Guards along the edge of the arena looked toward the announcer. Unsure what to do, the crowd was restless now. They had come for sport, but they were witnessing something else, something they didn't have a word for. Announcer stepped forward slowly, voice unsure for the first time. The human has won this round. No. Cheers, no clapping, only the low hum of fear and curiosity in the noble seats. The warlord who had wagered the girl clenched his fist. He turned to the alien beside him. A merchant lord with 2 mouths. You knew he was trained. The merchant raised his hands and shook his head. I thought he was dying. That's what your guards told me. The warlord growled, but said nothing. He looked down at the human again, then at the girl beside him, the slave who had always lowered her head. Now her chin was lifted slightly. Her eyes were locked onto the man below. The warlord's pride would not let him break the rules in front of the entire court. He waved his hand. Give him the girl. Gasps filled the stands. 2 guards moved to unlock her chains. She didn't move. She looked confused, even afraid. For years she had been passed between nobles, given and taken like a piece of cloth, but this time was different. This was not a trade. This was not a reward. This was something else. When the guards led her down the long steps, she could barely feel her feet. The human still had not moved. He watched her approach, his face calm, unreadable, tired but standing. She stopped a few steps away from him. They said nothing. Guards placed a small bag of food and a water flask at her feet, then left her there. The girl looked at the items, then at him. She waited for an order, but he turned away. Walking toward the arena gate, she stayed still, unsure. Then he paused and looked back. He tilted his head slightly, not speaking, but somehow she understood. She picked up the bag and followed inside the waiting chambers. The human collapsed onto a bench. He leaned back, breathing slowly. The girl stood near the door, unsure if she should speak. When he finally opened his mouth, his voice was low and rough. You have a name, she blinked, surprised by the question. I do not remember. He reached for the water and handed it to her. She held it, unsure if it was for her. He nodded once. She drank. It was the first clean water she had tasted in months. He leaned back again, closing his eyes. You are not mine. She stared at him, confused. I was given to you. You are not a thing. She sat down slowly, still watching him. No one ever said that to me. Silence filled the room outside. The crowd still shouted, arguing over bets and rumors, but inside, the space between them was still. She looked at his hands, scarred, swollen, one of them shaking slightly. He had killed 2 giants with those hands, but he had not raised them at her. Not once. She lowered her eyes, then, softly, spoke again. Why did you fight for me? He opened one eye and looked at her. I didn't. She frowned. I fought because they said I'd die. He paused, then added, but now I have a reason not to. Her chest tightened. She looked down again, not trusting the warmth in her throat. For so long, she had hidden every feeling, every memory, every hope, but something in his voice broke a wall she didn't know still existed. Doors to the chamber slammed open. A voice shouted from beyond, next fight. 1 hour. The human did not flinch. He stood up slowly, took a deep breath, and rolled. His shoulder pain flashed across his face. She stood too. You are still hurt. He nodded, then looked her in the eye. I'll need you to stay awake. Why? In case I stop breathing. She didn't answer. She just followed him back into the light, this time not as a slave, but as someone who didn't want him to die. The chamber was dark, except for the soft flicker of a torch near the wall. The human sat on the floor with his back against cold stone. He was bleeding again, not from the outside, but from inside. His breath was uneven, his hands slow, his chest rising. With effort, the girl crouched beside him. Her fingers trembled as she tore strips from her own garment to wrap his ribs. Watched her quietly, not stopping her, not helping either. She was trying in a way she never had before. Years she had been passed from one master to the next. She had served meals, cleaned floors, stood beside thrones like furniture. None of them ever looked at her face. They only wanted her to be quiet, to be beautiful, to belong to someone. Now she was here, wrapping a human warrior in silence, and he let her. You're not like them. she whispered, tying a knot. The man opened one eye. Like who? The ones who take things. She said, the ones who own people. He closed his eyes again. I don't want things. You were given me. I didn't ask for you. She sat back. Folding her legs, her chains were gone. But the feeling was still there. The feeling of being watched, of being measured, of being nothing. She looked at her hand's soft skin. Silver in the torchlight. She had once been praised for how delicate she looked, but no one cared if she bled or cried or screamed now. This man bled beside her and still asked for nothing. You can leave, he said suddenly. She blinked. Leave where? Anywhere. She looked toward the stone door. She had dreamed of escape for years now. She could walk away, but her legs would not move. She looked at him, realized the answer. I don't want to leave. He didn't smile, he just nodded once outside. Voices echoed through the arena halls. The next fight was being prepared, and bigger warrior this time, stronger, more dangerous. The nobles were not happy about the last fight. They wanted a show. They wanted to remind the crowd who ruled the galaxy. The girl stood up and walked to the doorway. She peeked outside, then returned. You should rest. He shook his head. No time. She knelt again. He looked at her, eyes tired but steady. Because they expect me to die. That's not a reason. It's enough for now. She reached into the food bag. It was small, just dry roots and hard bread. She broke it in half and gave him the larger piece. He took it, then hesitated. Do you remember your name? She shook her head. They called me Gift. He chewed slowly, thinking, that's not a name. I know. He looked at her again, then spoke softly. Rena. She tilted her head. What does it mean? Rain. Why that? It cleans everything. She felt a strange sound in her throat. A laugh, a real one. It had been so long since she had laughed that it scared her. He looked surprised too, but said nothing. She smiled again. Smaller this time. Then what's your name? He was quiet. I had one. You don't remember. He looked at the torch. No one says it anymore. Then I'll give you one. He raised an eyebrow. She looked around, then back at him. Stone. He waited. Because you don't move and you don't break. He almost smiled, almost outside. The horn sounded. The match was close. She reached for his hand. He flinched at first. Not from fear, but from habit. Then he let her hold it. You're not fighting alone anymore. He didn't argue, didn't answer, but when he stood, he didn't limp as much. When he walked toward the gate, he glanced back once, and she was still there. As a slave, not as a prize, not as a thing. She was something new now, and so was he. The sky above the arena was darker than usual. Storm clouds hovered, pulled in by the energy walls that circled the upper dome. The nobles said it was for atmosphere, but the girl felt something else in the air. Fear. She stood behind the gates, watching the human stretch his arm. His face calm but pale. He had barely healed from the last fight, his ribs still wrapped in cloth. She had tied with shaking hands. The horn blew once, then twice. Then the silence fell, the kind of silence before a storm guards drag something massive through. The far gate chains pulled across the ground like snakes, and then it stepped forward. The giant had no face, only a metal mask carved with old battle marks. Its arms were thick with armor, its shoulders wide enough to block a doorway where its hands should have been. There were weapons. One side held a spinning blade, the other dripped with acid. The crowd did not cheer. They watched, waiting. This was not entertainment anymore. This was execution. The announcer shouted from his tower. This is the undefeated champion of the Red Rings, the one called Breaker. Even the name sounded final. The human stepped forward slowly. His shoulders were straight, but his steps showed pain. The girl watched from the shadows of the archway, her hands pressed to her chest. She had seen this monster before. Breaker was not trained to fight. He was trained to destroy. No mercy, no rules. The bets came fast. Nobles shouting across rows, offering ships, planets, even blood packs. They all agreed on one thing. The human would not survive, and if by some miracle he did, they would never allow him to leave the arena alive. Breaker began to walk. Each step shook the ground. The human moved to the side, careful, slow. watching every joint on the giant's body. Then the first swing came a blur of steel and sparks. The blade missed by inches. The crowd gasped. The human ducked, rolled, and grabbed a broken shield from the ground. It was old and cracked, but it was something. The next attack knocked it clean from his hand. The human flew across the sand. His back hit the wall hard. He fell. Girl cried out before she could stop herself. He didn't get up. Breaker began to walk toward him, dragging the blade through the dirt. The human turned over slowly. Blood now ran from his lip. His right hand was limp, but his eyes still burned. He stood slowly and picked up a broken chain lying in the sand. He wrapped it around his forearm like a rope and moved again, this time faster. He ran under Breaker's arm and struck at the back of the leg. Sparks flew. Breaker stumbled, but only for a moment. The giant turned and swung the acid claw. It missed the human but splashed against the wall. The stone hissed and melted. The crowd rose to their feet. Now they were shouting. Some wanted death, some wanted more blood, but a few were quiet, watching the human with something close to respect. Human leapt and climbed up Breaker's back, chain in his hand hooked around the neck. Breaker roared and tried to shake him off. The girl could not breathe. She clutched the gate with white knuckles. The chain tightened. Sparks burst from the mask. Human shouted, his whole body straining. Breaker slammed against the wall again and again, but the human held on. One more pull, and the mask cracked. Breaker dropped to one knee. Then the human jumped down, picked up the old shield again, and drove it straight into the weak spot at the back of the neck. Breaker fell forward. The Kung fell forward. Arena shook. Silence again. No one moved, not even the human. He stood over the body covered in dust and sweat and blood, breathing hard. The girl ran into the arena. No one stopped her this time. She reached him and grabbed his arm. "You're hurt again." He didn't answer. His knees gave way. She caught him before he hit the ground. He looked at her, still breathing, barely, but smiling now just a little. I guess that one wasn't a fan of hugs. She laughed, not because it was funny, but because he was alive, and for the first time, she believed he might stay that way. The healer tried to stop him. "You need rest," the alien medic said. "You will bleed again." The human did not answer. He pushed himself off the table and grabbed the cloth to wrap his shoulder. His ribs still burned from the last fight, but he did not slow. The girl, now sitting near the wall, stood quickly. "You cannot fight again today." He looked at her, eyes steady. "I am not done yet." She stepped closer, her voice lower. "They are trying to break you." He picked up a piece of armor from the floor, dented and rusted. "Let them try, outside." The next match was being prepared. The nobles were no longer laughing. Some avoided eye contact with the arena floor. Others watched with narrowed eyes. He had turned the game into something else. The crowd did not cheer for blood anymore. They waited to see what he would do next. He had become something strange to them. Not a fighter, not a slave. Something between legend and threat. The warlord in gold armor stood and slammed his fist against the rail. "I want him erased." Another noble leaned in, whispering, "If you kill him now, the crowd will riot. Then send the best." The warlord hissed, "Send the blade master behind the scenes." Rena followed the human through the narrow stone hall. He was slower now, breathing harder, but still walking, still moving toward another fight. She walked beside him, then reached out and held his hand. He stopped. He looked down at her hand, then at her face. "I will walk with you," she said. He nodded once in the silence between them. Something unspoken passed, not love yet, but the weight of trust, the kind that cannot be bought or ordered. They entered the waiting chamber. The next fighter stood across the room, tall, calm, dressed in light armor, with twin swords strapped to his back. He was not a beast, not a monster. He was trained, precise, famous across systems. The blade master of Aaron Hall. He bowed slightly when he saw the human. "I did not expect you to walk in yourself." The human did not speak. The blade master smiled. "You look like you should be resting under a stone." The human kept his eyes locked on the opponent. "You talk too much." The gate opened. The crowd rose. The fight had begun. Rena watched from the edge, heart pounding in her chest. The two men circled each other. No weapons had been drawn yet. Then In a flash, steel appeared in the Blade Master's hands. He moved like water. Every step controlled, every strike perfect. The human did not play by rules. He dodged with broken steps used. The Sand of Blind used the broken pieces of stone as shields. He did not move like a champion. He moved like someone who had nothing left to lose, and that made him dangerous. The Blade Master sliced across the human's shoulder. Blood spilled. The crowd gasped, but the human did not fall. He grabbed the blade with his bare hand and pulled. The Blade Master stumbled. The human headbutted him hard, then drove his elbow into the jaw. Rena covered her mouth. She had seen this before in the mines where humans were once used to dig tunnels, in the war prisons where hope went to die. This was not just strength, this was survival turned into instinct. Blade Master tried to recover, spinning back with one sword raised, but the human blocked it with his arm and punched through the armor with everything he had left. Both men collapsed. Crowd screamed. Dust filled the arena for a few seconds. No one could see who stood. Then the dust cleared and the human rose. He limped. He held his side. But he rose. The Blade Master did not. Rena ran to him. She reached him before the guards did. He leaned into her arms, not from weakness, but because she was his ground. "Now you are not alone," she whispered. He looked at her with tired eyes, but in them was something new, not fire, not rage, stillness. He had fought because he had nothing. Now he fought because someone waited for him. The cell was small but quiet. No chains on the wall, no cold metal on her wrists, just silence, and the sound of the human breathing beside her. Rena sat cross-legged on the floor. She had wrapped his shoulder again with fresh cloth. This time he didn't protest. He let her care for him. For the first time since she was taken from her home, she was not scared to speak, not scared to look into someone's eyes, not scared to hope. He sat still as she tied the knot. His skin was bruised and torn, but his hands were steady, his voice calm. "You are not what they said you were." She looked up. "Then what am I?" He rested his head back against the wall. "Not a prize, not a slave." He opened one eye. "You are the only person in this place who has not asked me to die." She smiled softly. "I was raised to believe my life belonged to others." He looked at her. "Then take it back." She blinked. "I do not know how." He leaned forward slightly. "You start by choosing your name. I thought you already gave me one." "I did. But now you can keep it because you want it, or leave it behind." She paused, then nodded slowly. "Want to keep it." Rena, the way he said it made her chest tighten, like it was the first time anyone had spoken to her, as if she mattered outside the walls. The arena was being prepared again, but this time it wasn't just for a match. The nobles had seen enough. Some whispered that the human was a symbol of rebellion. Others said he was cursed. The warlord in gold armor stood at the highest balcony. His face was still, but his voice was sharp. "He lives one more fight, then the game's end. Send in the beast." Guards nodded without question. They turned toward the deep chamber beneath the arena where something worse than a warrior waited. Back inside the holding room, Rena brought a bowl of food to the human. It was simple but warm. She had asked for it, and no one had refused her, not after what the human did to the Blade Master. He took the bowl, but didn't eat right away. "You made them listen." She looked at him. "You made them afraid." He shook his head. "They fear what they do not understand, and I think they fear what I make them see." She tilted her head. "What is that?" He stirred the food with a spoon. "That even when you take everything from a man, his heart can still choose what to protect." She sat beside him. Their shoulders touched. She didn't move away. He didn't look surprised. Space between them was no longer full of fear. It was something else now, a strange kind of peace, a quiet understanding. Later that night she woke to the sound of metal boots outside the door, voices, short and cold. She touched his arm. He opened his eyes instantly. They both knew it was time. She grabbed the cloth she had used as a scarf, tore a strip from it, and tied around his wrist. "For luck." He looked at it, then looked at her. "If I fall, you won't. But if I do, you won't." She didn't let him finish. Her hand pressed against his chest, where his heartbeat thudded strong. "You are the one who gave me my name. I will not lose that again." He stood stronger than before. "Not because his body had healed, but because someone believed in him as he walked toward the gates. Guards stepped back without a word. Rena followed behind, not close enough to fight, but close enough to be seen. The crowd roared. As he stepped into the light, the announcer hesitated, then spoke the words with less certainty than ever before. "The human enters for his final match." No one laughed, no one cheered. They waited watching, because deep down they knew this was not just a fight, it was a warning. It was a storm they had created with their own hands, and now they had to survive it. The doors opened slowly. The arena was silent. The crowd did not cheer, not yet. They were waiting to see if this was the end or something else. The human stepped into the light. Rena stood at the edge of the shadows, her hands clenched at her sides, her scarf still tied around his wrist. It moved slightly in the wind. He didn't wear armor, just his torn shirt and wrapped shoulder. But he walked like a man with nothing to fear across the sand. The final challenger waited. It was not a warrior, not a soldier. It was a creation twice as tall as any man. Its skin was thick black metal. Its eyes burned like fire, had no mouth, only a sound, a deep hum that made the ground vibrate. The nobles called it the Ender, built in secret, trained to crush rebellion, unleashed only when rulers were afraid. And now they were afraid. They had bet everything that the human would lose, ship, cities, even Rena, and now they watched with wide eyes because he was still standing. The announcer barely spoke. His voice cracked as he called out the names. Then the horn sounded, and the Ender moved. It charged with speed no one expected. The ground shook, its arms swung like hammers. The human ran straight toward it, didn't hesitate. He ducked under the first swing, then jumped aside before the second. The metal claws slammed into the sand. Rena's breath caught in her throat. He reached the side of the beast, climbed its back, used broken chains to pull himself higher. The Ender shook wildly, trying to throw him off. He slipped once, hung by one hand, then pulled himself up again. The crowd leaned forward. No one blinked. He reached the shoulder and drove a blade deep into the joint. Ender roared without a mouth. Its arm jerked violently. The blade cracked. The human jumped off before the machine collapsed, but the fall hit hard. He landed wrong. His leg twisted. He shouted once, then forced himself up, limping now but still moving. The Ender turned its chest open to reveal a burning Korea final weapon. A beam began to glow. Rena screamed from the gate. The human didn't stop. He picked up a fallen spear, ran forward with everything he had left. The light grew brighter. He threw the spear. It struck the core. Sound was like thunder breaking stone. A burst of heat knocked everyone back. Smoke filled the air. Rena covered her mouth. Her eyes burned. She stepped forward, calling his name, but the smoke was too thick. Then the wind shifted and a figure walked out, one leg dragging, face covered in ash but still alive. The crowd exploded, not in laughter, not in anger, but in awesome. Dropped their drinks. Others dropped to their knees because they had seen something they would never forget. The warlord stood frozen, his mouth open, everything he owned gone, all his power bet on one mistake, that a human would break. Rena ran across the sand, her feet stumbling, but she didn't stop. She reached him, took his face in her hands. "You did it." He nodded. "You saw me." "I always did." He leaned into her touch. Crowd kept shouting, but their voices felt far away. The nobles no longer mattered. The empire no longer mattered. He had won not just the fight, but the one thing he never thought he would find again. Someone who chose him, without fear, without chains, just heart. She wrapped her arms around him, and for the first time in a long time, he let himself fall into her warmth, not as a prize, not as a symbol, but as a man who survived. Because when they bet everything, they forgot one truth: a human who fights for nothing may fall, but a human who fights for someone never loses.